Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Thursday, whatever day it is today of Drupal GovCon. Starting on Wednesday throws me off. Uh, this session we're going to be doing sort of an introduction to a bunch of different development technologies that you're going to use, or hopefully you're going to be using on a Drupal 9 project. Now, I intentionally called this a lightning round because we are not going to go super deep into any of these technologies. The idea is to touch on them at a high level, give you a little bit of flavor to understand what they are, how they work, how you can use them, and then move on so that we can really focus on sort of the aggregate buildup. Um, I do advise going deeper into any of these technologies, especially if you're not terribly familiar with them yet. But again, my intent here is to give you something to get started. Uh, my name's Mike Madison. If you don't know me, I'm a senior manager on Aqua's professional services team. I'm a Drupal 9 Grandmaster, and I did not know much about a lot of these technologies at one point in my career. I have degrees in English and design. I did not study computer science. I did not study engineering. And today I lead a team of some of the most capable technologists in the Drupal world. So if I can do it, you too can do it. It just takes some time and energy and effort, but I guarantee you it is doable. Today, I'm not going to give you an agenda because I don't have a lot in the way of slides. Because we're going to be doing this live, more or less. And if you go out to this repository, you'll see it's empty. I will be committing what I'm doing during this session into the repo so you can access it and check it out later. Please, if you have questions as we go, use the chat, use the QA. I'm watching both. Because I want to make sure that we do get those questions answered. And of course, I will have some time at the end. Now, due to time constraints, this is only a 45-minute session. This is the list that I'm planning on tackling today, a couple of minutes for each. Obviously, this is not dealing with deployments. This is not dealing with testing. This is not dealing with site building and configuration management workflow and so on and so forth. So there are more things that you will have to do for your Drupal site than I was able to fit into this time. But I thought it was really important to start from the beginning and go, as opposed to picking an arbitrary point somewhere down the line. Because again, my goal with this is to do an introductory session. And if we're going to do something to introduce these technologies, we really should start from the beginning. And I will give you a couple of quick disclaimers. I'm going to do all this live in front of you. Like, we're going to exit the slides in a moment. I'm going to be sharing my terminal and an IDE, and we're going to do it together. Some of this stuff I've kind of put into slides, or I may pull out of a different place to be sort of copy and paste as opposed to like hand typing all of it, just to make things go a little faster. Also, if you've seen me talk about DevOps in the past, normally I'm talking about BLT. Normally I'm using a really specifically Aqua stack. And I wanted to take sort of a different tack this year because I know that not everybody at GovCon is an Aqua customer, certainly, and I know not everybody can use BLT. So we're actually going to be doing everything today without an Aqua tilt. We're going to use one Aqua plugin, but no BLT. I'm not going to use GitHub. I'm actually going to be doing this with Gitlab and Gitlab Pipelines. As you may have noticed here, this is not my GitHub, it's my Gitlab. So we're just going to do this a little differently to show you a little variation. The other thing I want to mention, not shown on camera, is the 2 to 4 hours, or depending on your internet connection, of local machine setup. Now, I'm running a MacBook Pro. I'm running Big Sur. And to get that actually set up and ready to go for everything I'm doing here today, like, you have to download Xcode, which is like, I don't even know how many gigabytes Xcode is now, but that's going to take forever. Strongly recommend getting Homebrew configured. I'm running PHP 8, Composer 2, Node 16, NPM 8, Docker 3.6, etc. I do have a blog article on this. If you haven't come across my blog, I have a ton of stuff out there about DevOps and Drupal in general. Check it out. But just be aware, whether you're on a Mac or a Windows machine, you should be able to do everything I'm doing today, assuming you're on Windows Pro with the service layer installed. But there are a couple of hours of pre-setup that will be required to be able to jump in and do what I'm going to do here live. All right, so let's get started with a brand new project. So the Composer Create project is something I run on every single code base. We're just going to grab that and throw that into my terminal here, and we're going to get the ball rolling. Now, Composer 2 is lightning fast. So if you haven't already updated to Composer 2, I strongly recommend it. Composer 1 is going end of life. The Drupal community at this stage does support Composer 2 perfectly fine. I think you will find absolutely no drawbacks to going to Composer 2, other than saving yourself a lot of time, which is well worth it. And then quickly off screen, you can't see me doing this, I am going to open that new project that I just created in my IDE of choice, which is PHP Storm. So give me just a second here, and I'll get that on screen. All right. Whatever PHP IDE you use is up to you. I like PHP Storm, but Visual Studio Visual Code is fine. Pick your poison, doesn't really matter. All right, couple things that you're going to notice here to begin with. First of all, I am a fan of storing all of my Drupal stuff in the doc.root folder instead of the core or the web folder. So I'm just quickly going to go through and make that change to the Drupal recommended project. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what you call the Drupal root. But I would suggest checking with your hosting provider. Aqua pretty explicitly recommends doc.root. You know, depending on who you're working with, they may have their own preference. So I'm just going to quickly root rm-rf web, and we're going to reinstall Drupal here in just a moment into doc.root. Couple of additional packages I also want to add sort of simultaneously. Just pop window. The Composer patches plugin for Composer is, I think, absolutely critical. The one Aqua package or plugin that I'm going to be using is the Drupal Environment Detector. This one is really useful if you do plan on hosting with Aqua, because it helps you identify what environment you're running, local, dev stage, prod, whatever. And it is something I use on every project. And then, of course, we're going to want to use Drush. So we'll go ahead and add that. And I may need to get rid of my lock file because it put web right back. Doing it live. So you may see me have to do a couple of repetitive steps, and that is okay. There we go. Now we've got doc.root. And we'll just quickly run a Composer install to make sure everything is there and done. PHP Storm is now going to lag just a bit while it reindexes and adds everything that I just changed significantly. But everybody should now be in the doc.root directory, and we'll let PHP Storm do its deal and its indexing to come back. Cool. So at this point, what we've wired up is the very basic Composer scaffold. By no means have we done all of the things with Composer that we could or should. You know, a couple of things that are definitely missing here. The Drupal scaffolding is not currently in place, but you can do some really neat stuff with Drupal scaffolding. Oh, thank you, Kirsten. That's a good tip. If you're having trouble reading, you can check chat. She suggests how to make the text a little bigger so you can see what I'm doing in Hopin. Drupal scaffolding can be really useful for automating things like patching Drupal files if needed, copying some of the default files if you so desire, et cetera, et cetera. But this is enough for now to get the ball rolling, and we're going to move on from here. The next thing I want to do before I go much farther is Git configuration. So we're just going to do a quick git init to get this repository set up. And I will also add a git ignore file, which anytime you're using Composer is a fairly critical part of that Composer-based workflow. Remember, you don't necessarily want everything that your Composer file is managing for you committed into your Git repository. I clocked it once, and I feel like there's something like 40,000 files between the core directory and the vendor directory on the GovCon site. 40,000 files that we don't necessarily want to put into your development repository, right? Part of the advantage of doing Composer is you don't necessarily want tens of thousands of files that are already managed elsewhere in somebody else's repo. So by selectively git ignoring things like vendor, which is of course where all of your default Composer dependencies are going to go, doc root core, which is where Drupal core is going to go, doc root modules contrib, doc root themes contrib, libraries, profiles contrib, etc. These are all controlled by Drupal Scaffolding and Composer, which I'll show you in a sec. .idea, because I'm using PHP Storm. Node modules down inside the themes directories, because we will be wiring up NPM, which I will show you momentarily, and files, because we don't want to put any of our Drupal files into the Git repo. If we go back to our composer.json quickly, I can just show you every Composer project, every composer.json has a type. So if we come down here to installer paths, and I will blow this up, I'm not going to keep this in presentation mode the entire time because I do need to go back and forth a bit, but hopefully this makes it a little easier to read while we're here. So in the installer paths section of my composer.json file, if the type is Drupal core, it's going to put it into doc root core. If it is a Drupal module, it's going to put it in doc root modules contrib. If it is a Drupal profile, doc root profiles contrib. If it's a Drupal theme, doc root themes contrib, etc., etc., etc. So the reason I can safely git ignore things like doc root modules contrib in my git ignore file is because I know that every module that is coming from Composer is going to get dumped into that doc root modules contrib directory automatically. The last thing I'm going to do to Git before I move on, and this is a personal preference, one of the last two things, I'm going to do a git config for my local Git to ignore permission changes. This is a personal preference, but I really dislike my permission changes causing a bunch of Git diffs. So I tend to ignore those. The other thing I will do is just add an upstream. So get remote add upstream, and then get fetch upstream. And we will do some more with Git here in a little bit when we get ready to work with continuous integration. PHP Storm has finally finished indexing, so that's exciting. And you can see now that my vendor directory has turned this super cool light green color. Doc root core has as well. And that's just confirming that my git ignore settings are working and that vendor and Drupal core itself are now git ignored. So progress, good news. Let's move on. All right, next thing that we need to do is get a local environment set up, because at this point we have a project that's been scaffolded out. We have some of the basic dependencies that we need for that project, but we don't have any way to actually run Drupal. So let's get started with some of that. I am a big proponent of using Lando these days, so that is what I'm going to use. So we're just going to make a quick copy here of the settings.php file. It would help if I spelled it correctly. And this is where we're going to go ahead and come on. This is where we're going to go ahead and use that Aqua environment detector library that I added. So we're just going to use Aqua Drupal environment detector. And then all the way down here at the bottom, if Aqua Drupal environment detector is a local environment, we're going to do some stuff with our database array. And I'm just going to come up here and grab the default database. So we've got this, and I happen to know this already. So I'm just going to do this from memory and pull out all of that fun stuff. So what we're basically doing here is adding a local override for the databases array. The idea being that if we are running locally, which my Drupal environment detector is going to tell me, this is the database array that we're going to use for that local. I already have Lando installed. I already have Docker running, so I'm just going to run a Lando init inside my project. And we're going to work in the current working directory. And this doesn't really matter. I'm going to change it. We're going to use doc root as my web root. And we're going to call it DevOps. And before I start this project, I'm just going to go in here and change this to be Drupal 9. We're going to set the PHP version to 8.0. Is there anything else I want? This is where I cheat a little and check some of my pre-configured stuff. No, I don't think we're going to grab any other items out of here for now. We're just more or less going to go with the default call this govcon DevOps. It's going to go with more or less the stock Drupal 9 recipe, and I can go ahead and run a Lando start. One thing I love about Lando is how fast it provisions. I've used Drupal VM for years. I massively respect Jeff Geerling and love Drupal VM, but the initial provision process of Drupal VM can take a pretty long time. Lando tends to go pretty darn fast, so we're gonna just let this run in the background. Couple of other things that we need here will be the config sync directory in our settings, but we can mess with that later. We'll need a config directory. Again, we can mess with that later. While this is running, I'm going to go ahead and cheat. We'll come back to this and just grab a couple of additional Drupal modules that I know I'm going to want and need for sort of user experience, administrative user experience enhancements like config split, the environment indicator, Drupal config ignore, et cetera, just to go ahead and get these populated. Again, based on the way I've got my Composer project set up, you can see those automatically go into the contrib directory. You can see that's already get ignored, so I don't have to worry about these things getting committed. You could at this point add as many or as few of these as you want. I'm only adding a couple because again, we're not going super deep into any of this stuff. We're just doing kind of the surface level, but I do want to be able to show adding all of those pieces once we get Drupal installed. And once our database is up, which I believe it is, we should have everything we need to actually finish our installation here. All right, so now we have a site up and running, very exciting. Let's go ahead and run a Drush site install minimal. I'm running Lando as the command. Help if I ran the correct command. Let me clear this real quick so we get that junk out of there. Lando Drush site -install minimal with a -yes parameter. One more time. And we're just going to do the minimal profile because it is faster and should have Drupal installed in about 30 seconds. Obviously, there's quite a bit more, as I've said, on some of these other items to do to customize Lando. You know, if you want to see what I typically do in a Lando build, check out the GovCon repo, check out my BLT Lando plugin. You know, you can see there's quite a bit of additional stuff here to get BLT to work, Xdebug to work, Node installed, so on and so forth. But we're not going to mess around with all that stuff here today in the interest of expediency. Just the basic Drupal 9 recipe has everything you need to get the ball rolling for this. And I'm just going to go grab my URL for the site because we should be just about installed here. There we go. So now I can do a Lando Drush ULI. It's thinking, but I should be able to Lando Drush ULI and get a login directly into my site. Every now and again you do, there we go. I was gonna say every now and again I find with Docker, it's like it gets confused a little bit. And it sits there and spins and spins and thinks, and then all of a sudden it brings everything back all at once. All right, so we have our very beautiful, accessible Drupal 9 site. I hope all of you decide to go live with one that looks just like this, because this is maybe not hot garbage, but it's not very pleasant. But let's make this a little bit more pleasant. So we're just going to turn on some of the usual suspects that we'd probably care about in a Drupal site. Again, this is minimal. The whole point of minimal is it doesn't do anything. So we're just going to turn on some of the more critical, I think, you know, more critical modules, toolbar, views UI, workflow, admin toolbar. Of course, I want config split, so we can grab all that. That's probably good for now. Of course, we need to do some actual development if we're going to build this out to be a Drupal site, but I think that list of modules there is reasonable to begin with. We'll go ahead and just install those. And of course, I could be doing this from Drush. You know, I think we've already shown that Drush is up and working, but I don't know. I find something very refreshing and exciting about taking a really terrible looking minimal site like this and turning on Claro and Olivero and making it look like a modern site. So we'll do that here, and then we'll start dumping out some configuration. If you're watching the clock, by the way, we're about 20 minutes in. You know, 20 minutes from absolutely nothing to having Drupal up and running locally with a container. Obviously, again, I'm skimming the surface of some of these topics, and if you were doing this for reals, you might need to go a little deeper into some of these areas to really do it. But 20 minutes is not, I think, too shabby. And I would expect that if you were using something like BLT, or if you had, you know, already pre-configured this or done it many times yourself, you'd be able to do it even faster. So it's 20 minutes starting from nothing, sort of intentionally starting from nothing. So we now have some modules, toolbar, yay. We're going to go a step farther and install Claro, which we will turn on and set as our default admin theme. And we'll go ahead and install Olivero and set that to our default site theme as well. Spiffy. So this is not any significant amount of Drupal development or site building, obviously, but it's better than it was 5 minutes ago. Here's the problem. What I just did is in my local database. I don't have any configuration management strategy to speak of. If any of you wanted to pull what I just did, there's no way for you to get to it because it's on my local. And if I reran my drush site install command that I just ran, it would blow away everything that I just did, right? And that's not ideal. So the next thing I want to do in our talk here is set up a little bit of our configuration. Like I said, we're not going to go all the way into our configuration management strategy, but I do want to take just a moment and go a step deeper. So you can see that Drupal wrote out my settings or my database stuff in here. That's fine. I don't really care for this context. It doesn't really matter. So we'll save this namespace up here, and then I'm just going to get rid of the database and whatever. That's fine. The next thing you'll notice is that since I didn't have a config sync directory defined, it defined one for me, but by default it put it in sites default files. This is, I think, a pretty significant security vulnerability and not a best practice. So my advice to you is to get this out of here and do /config/default. This is going to store the config sync outside of your doc root, outside of your web root. So there's just 0% chance of it being web accessible. And now if I run something like Lando drush CEX, assuming I typed this correctly, drush should dump out my config export into a config sync directory for me. Okay, did I do it right? Let's see. It's going to take a sect index, as always. That is the one downside of IDEs. Like I talk about IDEs and how terrific they are, and they are terrific, but they do sometimes take a little bit to catch up with what you've done. But in this case, we're good. It's there. Awesome. Now we've got some config. I will say, just for the sake of it, that running drush site install again is still going to blow away my config and not put it back. And the reason for that is if you notice, the default Drupal installation doesn't do anything with configuration. So we've got a couple of options. We could do Lando drush site install minimal existing config. That would work. Or because I want to do something cool and different, so we're going to show you something cool and different, you can actually use Composer to define a scripts array. And then you can do something like site install and do something like this. So if I run the command Composer site install instead of drush site install, what's going to end up happening is Composer will run drush site install minimal -y, same command that I did a moment ago, drush updb -y, which you shouldn't need for a site install, and then it's going to import configuration a couple of times. So Lando Composer site install. Well, it would help if I wrote valid YAML, wouldn't it? Let's see, I think we might actually want to do this. Yes. Should have worked. Let's just make sure that my composer is working as intended. 1 second. Okay. Okay, composer site install should work. No, well, 1 second. I may have spelled something incorrectly. So let me copy in a pre-configured version of this. Put a couple of different commands in here. And try this one more time. Okay, let's do this then. Okay, why composer dump auto load? Of course, it would not be a live demo if something did not work. Now, I'm not going to sit here and fight with Composer live on the call, but it should be. Oh, you know what? I think it's because I put scripts inside extra, and I think it should go outside of extra. Let's try that. And if that doesn't work, I will move on. So, trailing comma. There we go. Cool. All right, so you can see my composer command running. In this case, I'm just going to do the existing config, but you can do whatever you want as part of that. So I realize I moved a little quickly there. Scripts does not go inside extra. That's why that was not working. Scripts should be outside of extra. So what we're doing now is we're just doing a site install minimal existing config. Yes, that's fine. And again, you can tag on as many drush commands into these as you want. And one of the big advantages of doing something like this is to make sure. So like with drush site install minimal existing config -y, like these are multiple things that you have to chain on. If you just run composer site install, that's one command. If we did want to go ahead and add in a drush cim-yes, after that, just to make sure that all of our drush config imported, again, you only have one command. And one of the things I found with development teams is that if you have a bunch of commands or a bunch of secret sauce that you have to run as part of those commands, developers are much less likely to run all of them in the same way every time. So if you can have some basic automation, as we do here, then your users are much more likely to follow the same procedures over and over and over and over again. So whether you're using BLT, whether you're writing some basic little composer scripts, pick your poison. It doesn't really much matter. But my advice to you when you're thinking about DevOps is to put those little scripts in place and make sure that your devs are using the same simple scripts, and let the scripts do the more complex stuff so that the devs don't have to do all of it. Our reinstall's finished, and I'm now back in my site. You can see the site is exactly as we left it a moment ago, which is a good sign, because if this had not worked, we would have been back to our original state with no anything. So good. We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to skip the config split step, but this is a good time to set up your config splits and get ready for those. The last big thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up a Gitlab pipelines file and actually push this up to Gitlab and do a merge request so we can get that running. Again, in the interest of time, I am going to copy in some steps. I will talk through them, but I'm not going to, handwrite out all of this. Mostly I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A here at the end. So for GitLab, their pipelines file needs to be named .gitlab-ci.yaml, which is what you see here. A simple GitLab pipeline might only have one build stage, which is what we're going to do here. Let me zoom in so you can read a little better. I'm using the exact same image in this GitLab pipeline that I'm using in my local Lando. I'm using the dev with Lando PHP 8 Apache 2 image. What image you use doesn't really matter, but I'm a big fan of using the same stuff everywhere I can, so I'm using it here. I've got a couple of variables defined just to show that as an example. I've got my MySQL service set up in the build, and then my script is basically doing a couple of things. First and foremost, we're creating a database. We are making sure that that database is set up. We're doing a app get update and installing Node. We're doing a composer validate. We're doing a composer install. Then we're doing a site install and a site update. Now, the site update command does not exist in my code base just yet. So let's go ahead and define that real quick. And I also want to show you getting npm set up to work. So we'll do that quickly as well. So for the site update command, we're going to do very similar to what we did for site install. Just going to take this back out of here because we're going to put this into the update command instead. So for site update, we're going to do a drush updb, drush cim. And if we're using config split, a second config import is advised because the first config import will enable the config split, and the second config import may find some additional things that aren't there. So there's the site update. And then, as I mentioned, the other thing I want to do quickly is just show you how to set up npm for a theme or whatever. I'm going to do it in a theme. So we're going to do themes, custom. I'm going to create a new theme called DevOps. So DevOps.info.yaml. And I will go and grab just some basic info to shove in this. Don't need anything other than this because we're just going to base it on stable, not exciting. And then we can go into doc root themes custom DevOps and just do an npm init. Package name DevOps, whatever. We're just going to do the basic here. Not going to define any of this. And then we'll do just an npm install pally, because that is a package that I know we can grab, and it's one that I know we can use. And that'll add a few things for us. The problem with adding npm into a module or into a theme like this, though, is that this package.json is buried all the way down here in my themes directory, and we want that to run, right? If we're going to use npm as a dependency manager, we need npm to actually install dependencies, and it's not going to do that right now. So I'm going to show you one more composer trick. Again, if I was using BLT, I would do this in BLT, but since I'm not, we're going to use Composer to do this. We're actually going to set up another Composer script that will do this for us. And Composer has this notion of a post command script. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to do a post install command. And what that essentially means is after Composer runs its install command, we're going to go into that theme that we just created and run npm install. So let me get out of my theme here real quick, clear, and you'll see if I run Composer install, Composer will do its thing, and then npm will do its thing instantly all by itself. which is super slick. All right. In the interest of time, I am going to go ahead and open a pull request with code that I've already pushed out into GitLab instead of going through a bunch of commits and doing that here. So let me jump over to GitLab. And I'll open a new merge request, and we're going to go from feature to main. We'll open a pull request. And you can see that my pipeline actually ran and succeeded the other day, which is nice because, again, in the interest of time, I don't want to make you sit here and watch a build run. But this very, very simple pipeline file that I've built out here, again, we're creating a database, installing Node and NPM, validating Composer, installing Drupal, and updating Drupal. 1 second, I lost my window. You can see all that happen, right? So we're pulling our Docker image. Here's that Docker image getting set up, the database getting set up, so on and so forth. You can all go see this. Here's where we're going to go ahead and create the database. You can see that we're going to do our app get update, app install. We're going to install Node.js. We're going to install npm. Composer validate, the composer's valid. Composer install. Here's where all of my composer packages get installed. Remember, now we do our composer site install. Remember, we're doing that existing config command. So this is where minimal gets installed. Composer site update happens. So we're going to run database updates, config imports. You can see no pending updates, no imports. And that's that. Our job succeeded. You can also see, sorry, that when I do my composer install back up here, that my npm install happened as well, right after, all in one command. So you might be wondering from here, what's next? Once you get pipelines and continuous integration running, the next piece is to get automated testing going, right? Because I know this all worked, but we haven't actually logged in and done some of that basic testing that I did for you live here in the browser to make sure that what I expect to be there is actually there. That could be functional testing, accessibility testing, whatever. And remember that everything we've done in CI is either in CI or still in my local, right? We still need to do a deployment, and you would typically do that with continuous integration as well. Once the build has concluded, you would have an additional step in your build to actually push that build out into your hosting environment. So we got done what we got done, but these are two very important steps that you should do next. Remember, I did this example with GitLab. For those of you who've seen me talk on this topic before, you can do it with GitHub, you can do it with Bitbucket, you can do it with whatever, doesn't matter. And you can use whatever CI solution you want, right? GitHub Actions, Aqua Pipelines, GitLab Pipelines, Bitbucket Pipelines, your own pipelines, whatever. Just matters that you're doing these things, not that you're using any specific product. Couple of quick things before we get to questions. Aqua is hiring right now, so if you're on the prowl for a new opportunity, I currently have job openings for technical architects and Drupal developers here in our professional services team. We're also looking for technical account managers, so you can reach out directly to Anthony if you're interested, or check out our careers page. If you enjoyed this talk, I'm talking later today in just a couple of hours to talk about Drupal 8 end of life. And I'll also be talking with my colleague Ron Northcutt tomorrow about Aqua Lightning's end of life. So if you're using Lightning, this is definitely a talk I'd suggest you join. And finally, please reach out, stay in touch. I really appreciate that the 40 plus of you came to chat with me today. Hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, check out my blog. Definitely would like to hear from you and what you're working on. And we've got a few minutes left for questions in chat or in Q&A.
Thanks so much, Mike. And great as always. It's great to have you part of Drupal GovCon again. I didn't see any questions come through, but
yeah,
I didn't
see any during, but yeah, if there are some folks that that are still here that have questions, yeah, please hit us up.
Mad respect for doing so much of this on a demo, on a live demo. That's hard to do sometimes.
So showing things not working is just important, as important, if not more so, than showing them working, right?
Agree. Yeah.
Right? Because I know one of the things that always, when I was moving from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, when I was learning about a lot of this stuff, uh, something not working was a big problem. I didn't know how to triage it. I didn't know how to debug it. So, uh, seeing it not work and watching somebody fix it, I think is a really critical piece of all this. John, yes, slides will be posted to the GovCon site. I'll also post them on my blog sometime in the not too distant future.
Yep, and we'll also be we'll be trimming all of these videos and adding them to the GovCon YouTube channel, so everyone can see those after the conference is over.
Yeah. Any other questions? I really appreciate all of you joining me here today, if not, and I hope you have a tremendous rest of GovCon. I wish we were all together in Bethesda, but better safe than sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, and the keynote's gonna be starting in about 15 minutes, I think. So hope everyone tunes into that. Thanks so much, Mike.
Yeah. All right. Well, looks like no questions. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.